sister called me at 6:47 on a Tuesday morning, and I knew before I even answered that something was wrong. She never called that early, not since her dad passed anyway. "The baby's coming," she said, and her voice was so thin, so stretched, that I felt my stomach drop. "They're taking me in now. It's too early, it's 3 weeks early. And Kevin's stuck in Calgary and I don't know what to do." I was already out of bed. "I'm coming. Don't think about anything, just go. I'm coming." My husband was still half asleep when I started pulling clothes out of the drawer. He lifted his head off the pillow and squinted at me through the light. "What's happening?" "My sister. The baby's early. I need to go to the hospital." He made a sound. Not words, just a sound somewhere between acknowledgement and annoyance, and put his head back down. I didn't have time to think about that then. My sister, Piper, was 34 weeks along and terrified, and I drove 40 minutes to St. Michael's in a light January sleet, thinking only of her. She'd had a rough pregnancy from the start. Hyperemesis through the first trimester. Preeclampsia scare at 28 weeks. She'd done everything right: the prenatal vitamins, the check-ins, the modified work schedule, and her body had kept finding ways to make it harder. She and Kevin had been together 8 years, tried for this baby for 3, and here she was, alone in a hospital bed while her husband scrambled to catch the first flight out of Alberta. I stayed with her through 14 hours of labor. I held her hand. I fed her ice chips. I talked her through every contraction when she was too tired to remember to breathe. And when her daughter finally came small and pink and furious about it, I cried harder than I had in years. My husband texted me at hour 11, "Everything okay? Coming home for dinner?" I put my phone face down on the chair beside me and didn't answer. Piper was discharged after 5 days. Her daughter, Nell, was kept in the NICU for another week. Her lungs needed a little more time. The nurses explained in the calm and careful way that NICU nurses have that somehow makes you feel both reassured and terrified at once. Kevin flew home the day after the birth, pale and shaking with guilt for not having been there. And he was wonderful with Piper, genuinely. But he'd never changed a diaper in his life, and Piper was healing from a difficult delivery and couldn't lift anything heavier than the baby for 6 weeks. I asked my husband if Piper could stay with us for a while once Nell came home from the hospital. We have a 3-bedroom house in Oakville. The 3rd bedroom had been a home office, then a dumping ground, and had finally been cleaned out the previous spring when we thought briefly, hopefully, that we might be trying too. That hadn't happened. The room sat empty. It had a proper bed, a closet, a window that got afternoon light. It was perfect. My husband said he'd think about it. I gave him 2 days, which was 2 more than I wanted to give him. "It just throws off the whole rhythm of the house," he said finally, on a Thursday evening while I was making pasta. He was standing in the kitchen doorway with his arms crossed. "Having people here, it changes everything." "She just had a baby," I said. "Her husband works in rotation. She doesn't have family closer than Sudbury. She needs help. She has Kevin. Kevin is away 3 weeks out of 4. And when he's home, he's still figuring out how to hold an infant without looking like he might drop it." My husband made the face he makes when he thinks I'm being dramatic. "She's a grown woman. She'll figure it out." I turned the burner down, turned to look at him fully. "My sister almost delivered at 34 weeks with dangerously high blood pressure. And she just brought a premature baby home from the NICU, and you want to tell me she should figure it out on her own?" "I didn't say that." "What did you say then?" He didn't answer directly. He said it was a big ask. He said we had our own lives. He said he liked having the house be their space, just the 2 of them, and that guests disrupted things. He said all of this in the careful, reasonable tone he uses when he's decided something and wants me to arrive at the same conclusion without feeling managed. I let Piper come anyway. She stayed for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of middle-of-the-night feedings, of tiny onesies drying on the bathroom rack, of Nell's little mewling cries, and Piper finally starting to look less like a person standing at the edge of something, and more like herself again. I loved every single morning of it. I would wake up and hear Nell fussing down the hall and feel something loosen in my chest that I didn't know had been tight. My husband was not warm about it. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't dramatic. He was simply absent. He ate dinner in front of his laptop. He stopped coming to the living room in the evenings. He started going to bed at 9, which he had never done in the 8 years we'd been together. He said good morning to Piper with the exact amount of politeness required and then disappeared. When No cried and it woke him up, he would lie rigid beside me in the dark and say nothing, but I could feel it, the held breath, the deliberate stillness that isn't rest. One night Nell was about 10 days old at this point, and Piper was sleeping longer than 3 hours for the first time since coming home. He turned to me and said quietly, "I need you to set an end date." I stared at the ceiling. She's recovering from a traumatic delivery. I understand that. I still need an end date. She's my sister. And this is my house too. I turned my head to look at him in the dark. He was looking at the ceiling. His jaw was set in that particular way that meant the conversation was over in his mind, regardless of what I said next. I didn't give him an end date. Piper left when she was ready when Nell had her 4-week checkup and got a good report, and Kevin was back from his rotation, and she felt steady enough to go home and not feel like she was drowning. She cried when she hugged me goodbye. I told her she could call me anytime, any hour, and I meant it. After she left, my husband said, "Good, now we can get back to normal." I remember thinking, is this normal? His family had a tradition. Every year, his mother flew in from Halifax for the stretch between Christmas Eve and New Year's Day. It was simply what happened. It had happened every year we'd been together, and I'd never once questioned it. I liked his mother well enough. She was brisk and organized and had opinions about everything from federal transit policy to the correct way to fold a fitted sheet. And she said what she thought, and I respected that, even when what she thought was pointed in my direction. This year she arrived on December 23rd. She came in, kissed her son, looked around the house, and said, "You rearranged the living room." "We did," I said. "Back in the spring." She said in the way that means she didn't approve but wasn't going to make a point of it, which is somehow worse than if she'd just said it. That was fine. I could handle, What happened over the next 8 days is harder to explain cleanly, because it wasn't one thing. It never is with stuff like this. It was 100 small things that each had a perfectly reasonable explanation and together added up to something I couldn't name until I was standing in our bedroom at 11:30 on New Year's Eve. Folding laundry I didn't need to fold yet, just to have something to do with my hands. She rearranged the kitchen. Not maliciously, she was cooking Christmas dinner and she couldn't find the colander and she moved some things around and then couldn't quite remember where everything had been. But I came home from a last-minute grocery run to find my kitchen reorganized according to a logic that wasn't mine. And when I mentioned it, my husband said, she was just trying to help. She made comments about the food I'd bought, not to me, to my husband, while I was in the room. "Is she feeding you this all the time? You need more protein." And he laughed like it was a joke and poured her more wine. She used our bedroom ensuite without asking, not the guest bathroom, which was 2 steps from her door and perfectly nice. Our bathroom. I found her moisturizer on our counter and said nothing. She asked me, on Christmas Day, in a casual voice while I was washing dishes, whether we'd looked into why we hadn't had children yet, whether it was something we were dealing with, whether we'd considered what options were available. My husband was in the living room. He either didn't hear or didn't choose to. I dried my hands on the kitchen towel and looked at her for a moment. "That's pretty personal," I said. "I just want grandchildren," she said, and shrugged, and walked back to the living room. I stood at the sink and breathed. I cooked every meal that week except Christmas dinner, which she cooked. I changed the bed sheets in the guest room twice. I drove to 3 different stores on December 27th to find the specific brand of crackers she likes. They only carry them at certain Loblaws locations, apparently. And when I put them on the table that evening, nobody said anything, which was fine. I didn't need thanks. But my husband didn't say anything either, and something about that specific silence felt very loud. The morning of December 30th, I woke up early and lay in bed while my husband slept, and I thought about Piper. I thought about Piper lying in that hospital bed at 6 in the morning, her husband in another province, contractions she wasn't supposed to be having yet. I thought about my husband in bed at 9 o'clock every night she was here, that deliberate, pointed stillness in the dark. I thought about it just throws off the whole rhythm of the house. And I thought about the past 8 days, and how not once had he told his mother that anything she did or said was too much. Not once had he come to the kitchen and asked what I needed. Not once had he set a plate on the table or started a load of laundry or said quietly, "Hey, thank you for everything you're doing this week." I got up. I went to the bathroom and looked at my own face in the mirror for longer than I probably needed to. And then I opened the cupboard under the sink and got out my overnight bag. I didn't pack dramatically. I packed the way I pack for a work trip, methodically, efficiently, just the things I needed. A week's worth of clothes, my toiletries, my laptop, the book I'd been trying to finish since September, the chargers. I moved quietly because I'm not a person who wants a scene, and because I wanted to be clear to myself that this wasn't anger. Not exactly. It was something calmer and more certain than anger. I zipped the bag. I set it by the bedroom door. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table while it brewed, and I thought about what I wanted to say. My husband came downstairs at 7:15, saw the bag, and stopped. He looked at the bag. He looked at me. What's happening? I wrapped both hands around my mug. I'm going to stay at Piper's for a few days. It's New Year's Eve. I know. He pulled out the chair across from me and sat down. What is this about? And here's the thing, here is the specific thing that I want anyone reading this to understand. He asked the question like the answer might genuinely surprise him. My sister was here for 3 weeks, I said. She just had a premature baby on her own, while her husband was in Alberta. She needed help. And the whole time she was here, you treated our home like it was under occupation. You went to bed at 9 o'clock. You stopped eating dinner with us. You gave me an ultimatum about an end date like she was a contractor who'd run over schedule. He started to say something. I kept going. Your mother has been here for 8 days. I have cooked every meal. I have reorganized the kitchen back to the way it was, quietly, so nobody noticed. I drove to 3 grocery stores for her crackers. I have smiled through comments about my body and my fertility that I would not accept from anyone else. And you have said nothing. You have done nothing. You have not once thanked me, asked me how I was doing, or told your mother that there are things she should not say in our house. The kitchen was very quiet. I'm not leaving you, I said. I'm telling you what I need you to understand. And right now, I need to be at my sister's. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, you could have told me all of this. I'm telling you now. I mean before it got to bags. I told you I needed you to be kinder when Piper was here. You told me to set an end date. His jaw worked. He looked at the table. He had the grace, at least, to look like something in him recognized itself. What do you want me to do? He said finally. I want you to think about why the same situation family needing help, staying in our house looked completely different to you depending on whose family it was. I want you to sit with that. Really sit with it. Not explain it, not justify it, just look at it. I picked up my bag. I kissed him on the cheek, not cold, just honest. I'll be back Thursday, I said. We can talk then. I drove to Piper's through a light morning frost, and she opened the door in her housecoat with Nell on her shoulder and one eyebrow raised. I told her everything over coffee while the baby slept between us and the bouncer, her little fists curled up beside her face like she was bracing for something. Piper listened the whole way through. When I finished, she said, "You should have called me sooner." I know, I said. He's not a bad person, she said, and she meant it as a real thing, not a consolation. But he's been getting away with a double standard for a long time. I know that too. Nell stirred, made a small, opinionated sound. We both looked at her. She's going to be a handful, Piper said. And she was smiling in the way she does now, tired and soft, and like she's arrived somewhere she didn't know she was trying to get to. Definitely, I said. My husband called that afternoon. He said his mother had asked where I'd gone, and he'd told her I was visiting Piper, and she'd said, "Did something happen?" And he'd said yes, and told her in general terms what I'd said. He told me his mother had been quiet for a while, and then said, and he relayed this carefully. I didn't realize I should have been more considerate. I stayed at Piper's for 3 nights. They were good nights. I woke up at 2 in the morning on the first one and heard Nell fussing, and I went and picked her up before she could properly cry. And I walked her back and forth in Piper's dark kitchen until she settled, and I thought about the fact that I had driven to 3 grocery stores for crackers, and about how I had also driven 40 minutes through January sleet to hold my sister's hand through 14 hours of labor, and how I would do that second thing again in a heartbeat, and would think about the first one differently from now on. When I got home on Thursday, his mother had extended her flight. She was sitting at our kitchen table with a cup of tea and a different expression than the one she'd come in with. She looked up when I walked through the door. "I owe you an apology," she said, "a real one." I set my bag down. I sat across from her, and I listened. It didn't fix everything. Things that have been out of alignment for years don't get fixed in a week, and I knew that. But my husband, who was leaning against the counter with his arms at his sides not crossed, just there, open, looked at me in a way he hadn't looked at me in a long time, like he was seeing something clearly that he'd been letting blur. Some things, I think, have to get named before they can change. I'd spent too long going quiet when I should have spoken. Too long tidying around an imbalance instead of pointing at it directly and saying, "Look, here. This is what I see." He asked me that evening, after his mother had gone to her room, what I needed going forward. Not in the therapeutic, careful way that can sometimes feel like another kind of management genuinely. Just, what do you need? I told him. He listened. That was the beginning of something that I don't have a clean ending for yet. We're still in it, but I know what I brought to that kitchen table, and I know what I drove away with. And I know that Nell is 7 weeks old now and doing just fine. Her lungs pink and full and as opinionated as the rest of her, and that some mornings that feels like everything. I keep coming back to the moment I stood at the kitchen sink on Christmas Day, drying my hands on a dish towel, after being asked whether I'd looked into why we hadn't had children yet. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just stood there and breathed, and something in me went very quiet in a way that I think had been building for a long time. That kind of quiet isn't weakness. I used to think it was. I used to think that the people who held their tongue and kept moving were the ones who hadn't figured out how to fight back, but I think now it's something closer to the opposite. It's what happens when you've finally gotten clear enough about what you value that you don't need to perform your anger for anyone. You just know what you're going to do next. What I did next was pack a bag, not out of spite, out of honesty. There's something I've learned about the way causes and effects work in a marriage, or really in any close relationship. The things you allow quietly don't disappear. They accumulate. My husband didn't wake up one December morning and decide to apply one set of roles to my sister and another to his mother. It happened over time, in small moments, that each had a reasonable explanation. He was tired, he needed his space. It wasn't personal, but the pattern was personal. The pattern was always personal, and the longer I went without naming it, the more it became mine to carry. Naming it, when I finally did, took something. It took being honest enough with myself first, which is harder than it sounds when you've spent years finding generous explanations for things that didn't quite add up. That kind of honesty is its own form of integrity, not honesty as in blurting out everything you think, but honesty as in not lying to yourself about what you see. I saw the double standard clearly. I had seen it for weeks. I just had to find the courage to say so out loud, in plain language, at the kitchen table, to the person I needed to hear it. And then I had to leave for a few days, not forever, just long enough for both of us to sit with something true. Piper said something that stayed with me. She said he wasn't a bad person. She meant it, and I believed her. And I think that distinction matters, because I think we sometimes make it too easy on ourselves by deciding that the people who hurt us must be irredeemable. It lets us off the hook from the harder work of figuring out what we actually want to do. and who we actually want to be in response. The harder thing, and the more honest thing, was to say, this is a person I love, who has a blind spot, and I am going to name that blind spot clearly, and then give him the chance to look at it, and then see what he does. He looked at it. I don't know yet where we land. I don't think you ever fully know that. But I know that Nell is doing well, and Piper is sleeping more than 3 hours at a stretch. And I drove through January sleet to be there when she needed me, and I would do it again without a second thought. I know that the version of me who went quiet at the sink is not the version I want to keep being. And I know that the morning I packed that bag, methodically and without drama, was the morning I stopped carrying something that was never mine to carry alone. That's enough to go on with.